Ballpark Nation presents. Welcome to Go Astros, your look at the two-time World Series champions from three guys who have been here since Art Howe had hair.
And welcome everybody to Go Astros. Before we jump into this, Brian, you and I are not in Houston, so obviously our thoughts, prayers, and if there's anything we can do for everybody that's still without power or still kind of underwater, by all means, reach out to the show, even if it's just spreading the word about Red Cross stuff. Brian, it's pretty tough to watch the city go through this again.
Yeah, and they basically just went through it. A bunch of it went through it in May with the derecho.
Yeah,
and now the hurricane, so it'll be Anyway, love and hugs to everybody, and I'd offer to come put some electric lines together, but you actually want them to work. So,
yeah, right. And for all the people that wish that we had put them underground, yes, I wish we'd put them underground too. I just don't know that anybody's going to want to pay to put them underground now. But that ends our electric grid portion of the show today. Brian, very good, not great, but very good road trip. I think particularly with the home road splits the Astros have shown this year, which unlike other years has kind of been the opposite, where they've not played super great on the road. And broad strokes overall, what were your thoughts of the 10-game road trip?
Yeah. So broadly, we think this is a 600 team and not the 300 team we saw in the first month of the season. And they played like it on this trip. And they've basically been playing at that level for, 2 months now. And then they sort of, leveled up here. So they were in the race, which again is what we were worried in April they wouldn't be. They needed to play a lot better immediately after sort of the nadir, the really sort of bottom of the season after the Cub series. And they've done that, and they've given themselves a chance. And if you look at sort of playoff odds, they're sort of 50-50 to make it, which is, some of the better odds we've seen since they actually started playing games this season.
Yeah, and I think only 7% off of the lead for the Mariners. And we'll get to the Mariners in a second, because you don't gain 8 games in 2 weeks by just winning. You have to have a little help from our friends, as it were. One of the things that's impressed me, Brian, about the team, well, 2 things. One, I remember going back to our season premiere, and all of us kind of knew that the schedule was tough and that the pitching was going to be off for a while. I don't think none of us saw 9-18 or whatever the start was, but we all kind of thought, okay, be within a few games at the All-Star break, and then the team was going to take off after the All-Star break. It's starting to line up that way. The thing that's impressed me, though, has been that it's a lot of baton passing in the offense. It's continuing to win despite losing Kyle Tucker, and just the pieces have been falling, but the Astros keep winning. Overall, what is your explanation for what the offense has been able to do?
Yeah, part of it is the offense is there's no easy out. And so, there's some guys who are slumping occasionally, but the slack they're creating the lineup is being made up for by someone else. And we particularly see that in the last month where Kyle Tucker's been out.
Yeah.
He was almost essentially it felt like a one-man offense at times early in the season. And so when he went out, for obvious reasons, and I will welcome him back enthusiastically because he is one of the team's best players, if not its best player. But, that they've gotten contributions from Jake Myers is having his best season at the plate. Okay? That, Jeremy Pena is having a better season at the plate than he did last year. It's not a great season, but it's, it's productive. Alex Bregman had a terrible April because he always has a terrible April, but has been steadily improving since then. So it's a deep lineup, and that has been really essential now that Kyle Tucker's been out for a month with a one-day leg bruise.
Yeah, it's been impressive to see. It's also kind of cool to see role players stepping up. Dubon is almost automatic when there's a short list of who you want up there with less than 2 outs and the bases loaded, and Dubon is one of those guys because he doesn't strike out a lot and he puts the ball in play.
Yeah, he's one of the highest batting average guys on the team. It's every once in a while he'll run into one and drive a ball. That's pretty rare, but it's a useful, it's a useful set. It's a useful set of skills to have, particularly at good moments. And again, broadly, he's been another sort of effective player, and he's essentially been a regular since Cal Tucker went out, and he's been a big contributor.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like about him is you put him in the 9-hole, and it explains why the Alvarez in the 2-hole made all the sense in the world, because you do want your best hitters to get the most at bats. And if you have a guy like Dubon at the end of the lineup, it's like having another leadoff hitter later on in the game where you do get RBI opportunities. And we've seen that not necessarily with Jordan, so they moved him out, but I think part of, for example, Bregman's getting better is having more opportunities like that.
Yeah, and again, the basic principle is, right, that you want to give more at-bats to your best hitters, so you want to move it earlier in the lineup. That's a broad trend across Major League Baseball that, it's unclear to me why we moved away from that in the 1910s, but that's a historical argument we don't need to get into. But it does put pressure on the 9 hitter, because if you can have more people on base when, Kyle Tucker, I assume when he comes back, will be in the 2 spot in the order. And if Kyle Tucker is in the 2 spot, hey, you want him there to get a lot more at bats. You want people on base because he gets a chance to drive them in. So again, Dubon hitting, when Dubon hits 9th, that's a good sign that the offense is in good shape, because that's a really good hitter in the 9-hole, and that's unusual.
I want to talk pitching. I want to first of all, we're not going to talk about Hunter Brown's start. I was there, and for the first two innings, that was baseball at its cruelest.
Yeah.
I actually asked a Twins fan. I said, "How high do y'all grow that grass?" Because it was just, I think that his first 3 or 4 hits, none of them were over 80 miles an hour off the bat. Like, it was baseball being baseball. Arrighetti had a decent start, but I'm overall not sure how much longer his stuff is going to play as a starter in Major League Baseball. And I don't think it's a lack of talent at this point. I think it's experience. I think it's also maybe running into more pitches than he's ever thrown in a career. I don't know where that is, but it just seemed like he kind of can get shaken a lot. He can get shaken pretty easily, particularly these last couple of starts.
Well, he lacks command, and that's the part he most needs to work on. And so he's not quite able to just, throw the ball where he wants, where, when you have a top pitcher and they walk a guy, you're often like, they're going to come back next time and be able to put the ball where, and the next hitter put the ball where they want. They won't get phased by that. We saw that with like Brian Presley. He gave up the 2 hits. Yeah. And you're like, okay, that's worrisome. But it's Ryan Presley. He's not worried. He's neither, emotionally, mentally not worried about this. And he also knows he can throw pitches that are going to do effective stuff. It's harder for Spencer Arrighetti to do that because he's not at that level of pitcher. He needs to develop more. But, they don't have another option.
Yeah,
they have 4 healthy starting pitchers on their 40-man roster. They are choosing right now to go with a bullpen game. For the 5th game, we'll sort of see what they do this week, and then their alternative to that is that Jake Bloss had a rehab assignment, so he may be back soon. And if you thought, oh, thank goodness we're going to get Jake Bloss back at any time, before June 15th, said Sandy, go have an hour. You wonder what the hell happened, right? how we ended up this way. So, I guess the broader good news is Luis Garcia has begun his rehab process.
And seems to be further ahead than even he thought he would be at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's the biggest thing. I don't expect Luis Garcia to come back and be the best Luis Garcia, but I do expect him to provide some innings.
Well, and we had said
that desperately needs it, including that Arrighetti and Blanco are probably going to hit innings limits, and as I've long maintained, Arrighetti's best role on this team is as a long man, a multi-inning reliever out of the bullpen, and hopefully one day they can get him to that point.
Yeah, and we had talked about last week how with this particular team, we just need pitchers who don't shit the bed. We just need average guys. We don't need Fromber, who's been schizophrenic, had another schizophrenic start his past start.
Yeah, and again, part goes back to the comment we made earlier. Because the offense is playing so well, They don't have a Cy Young candidate. They don't have sort of anyone pitching at an ace level right now. But if they get a bunch of, good innings from a starter, 5-6 innings, and turn it over the bullpen, they're probably going to score enough runs to do well. Particularly if they can get healthy in the front part of the offense.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the offense again. We've talked a lot of good news, and there's more good news to talk about. But Brian, Chas McCormick looks lost at the plate. I'm not a super reactionary, but I do wonder if he's becoming unplayable at this point. What do you see out of Chas, and did you see any hope that he's going to bring it back, or is he one of those guys that kind of came out of nowhere and this maybe has been the end of his run?
I don't think it's the end of his run because he's been a high quality hitter for several years. It was kind of a shock when he made the roster back in 2021, sort of the fourth outfielder, but he proved himself immediately to be a major league quality player, somebody who can be a contributor. He may not be, so I kind of think last year was his peak season and things went well, and this is going to be his non-peak season, but hopefully he can try to get back to that. So one of the bigger issues with Chas right now seems to be he's striking out too much. And there's this issue with Chas, which he'd probably be better off playing every day and getting his swing sort of back. But because he's slumping and because it's at a position where, again, you need to get Dubon at bats. For that reason, you need to get Jake at bats and you need to get Loperfido at bats. He doesn't get to play every day. And so, there is a case that he should go down to AAA for a month, play every day down there, find his swing there, and come back. I would not be opposed to that, but that's a question I'll have to answer when Kyle Tucker gets back, which is unfortunately still after the All-Star break. So,
which is just week after next. So that's
it's not disastrously long, but it's certainly longer than we like.
Yeah, it's certainly longer than we like, longer than we thought. Hopefully, it's been so long because they felt no reason to rush him back because the team was winning. To that point, then, crowded outfields and whatnot. Trade deadline is coming up shortly after the All-Star break. What moves, starting from the Astros perspective, who do you think most likely could be gone after the All-Star break?
Yeah, so I think there are two sort of big overriding questions that the front office has to answer. The first is a very specific question for Jim Crane, which is how much luxury tax is he willing to pay? How much salary is he willing to take on? And it's hard for us to judge that from the outside because this is the most luxury tax. He would have paid it in 2020, except we're going to pretend 2020 didn't happen. And this is the most he's ever paid for part of that. So sort of what's his tolerance for that, his payroll tolerance for that is, again, and it's a very specific owner question, not a Dana Brown question, not any of the other sort of advisors question. The second question is, what is a wild card spot worth? And I'll say this is a wild card spot because they have an excellent chance of winning the division. They're basically a coin flip to win the division in most of the playoff odds right now, but they are really unlikely to get a first round bye. So
right.
They do win the American League West.
Exactly.
Guardians are playing
series
great
regardless. Yeah.
They're having a great time on Go Guardians this year. So even if they do win the American League West, want to win the American League West, it's a guaranteed thing. Right? They're probably in a 3-game wild card series, which is not quite a coin flip, but 3 coin flips. So what is that worth? Now, tempering against that is ever since the Verlander trade a year ago, part of my analysis of the Verlander trade is that Jim Crane, and I think that's Jim Crane, making the decision that we are all in to win the World Series in 2023 and 2024. And, Verlander kind of struggled in the first month, but was excellent in September. He was a big part of the reason why they won the division. So I think the trade worked out then. Hopefully he comes back and we can say the same thing this year. And so that may mean they're more likely to go for it because, they're more likely to make a trade. So I think those are the big questions overriding this trade deadline from an Astros standpoint. And other teams may not make the same sort of calculation that really going for it this year is part of it. I guess arguing against that is the teams they're most competing with for the final wild card spot right now are Kansas City and Boston, two teams who haven't been to the playoffs for a while, so they can't sort of just shrug off a thing. On the other hand, if I'm Kansas City, I'm like, but I think I'm a better team in 2025 than I am in 2024. You need to keep that in mind as I.
How much of that do you think is like? I hate to detour you, but
sure.
How much of that is like a front office's? I know how analytics driven. I mean, how much of that is the front office's consideration saying, "Yeah, we could be in, but it would be cute, but next year we think we really can compete."
So if you look at like the Orioles in 2022,
okay,
they made a very sort of clear, we have a chance this year, but we don't think it's a good chance, and we'd rather prioritize the future. Now, they were heavily criticized for that. At the time, they were just seen as sort of, the ultimate sort of analytics people, which, A, maybe they are, and B, hey, they're really set up now and for the future here because of the good decisions they've made. For the Astros, I mean, and part of that choice for the Astros is it is likely that 2026 is not as good as 2024.
Right.
It is likely that 2027 is not as good as 2024. Could be wrong on that. Hope to be wrong on that. There are lots of scenarios.
Lots of ways, right.
The future that's hazy, right? But part of it is, right, it's likely the future is not as good as the present or the past for the Astros, which is mostly a statement of how good the recent past has gone.
Right. And we have even gone as far as to saying 2025 even looks good because you still have Tucker, but after that, you can start to see. Right, totally.
Yeah, they have to make decisions, and sort of the bigger part of that, right, is like if Joey Luperfido turns out to be a high quality regular, you add him with Yainer Diaz, you've got a better floor in the future, but that's still to be determined. Your ability to sort of develop young players, and we're not sure who the next guy is on that list. It seems to be at least a year away for somebody like that. So that's just part of the analysis that, again, that's sort of the big picture analysis the front office has to make. But again, since they've mostly been going for it, I think they probably will. There are two clear areas where they could make improvements. One would be at first base.
Right.
The other would be in the starting rotation.
Let's talk about first base real quick. I believe they need to upgrade at first base. And I believe that even though we have to be honest, Singleton is playing a much better first base than I think anybody expected. Part of me waits for the other shoe to drop. Yeah. But I remember I was talking to Twins fan on that Friday night game, and I was like, yeah, every once in a while he'll run into one, and then he immediately ran into one. So what is your comfort level if they decide, hey, what we have at first base works?
For me, it's actually pretty high because Singleton has proven that he has two very useful skills. One is he has a pretty good eye at the plate. He takes lots of walks. Yeah. And two is, as you said, he runs into the ball. His biggest weakness is on defense. He doesn't move well. He doesn't move well laterally, and it's hurting them. It's hurting them defensively. I'd be more interested in a move that would improve them defensively there, in sort of thinking about it. But again, depends on sort of what they're able to find and looking for. The thing that sort of mitigates that is if they can only make one move salary-wise, which is kind of the assumption I'm working under. Maybe they make two again. They keep making, Jim Crane's not proving all that sensitive to the luxury tax right now. So maybe I'm wrong on that. But if there's only one move, it seems to me starting pitching is a bigger priority. Yeah. There don't seem to be any going to start first game of the playoffs candidates out there like the two times they've acquired Verlander at the trade deadline. And they're much more, I think, for someone who's going to start game 3 or game 4, someone who can eat innings for them and to take some burden off, again, particularly Arrighetti and Blanco, who have never thrown this many innings. Hopefully, you get Luis Garcia and Lance McCullers into that mix. And again, to make a point I made last week, part of the evaluation Dana Brown has to make in doing this, and this one I think is Dana Brown and his staff, is what's Luis Garcia and Lance McCullers going to be 6 weeks from now? Right. Remember that Luis Garcia is, throwing rehab games, but that's essentially spring training. And remember how, in spring training, the hitters are always ahead of the pitchers? Uh-huh. Well, imagine if the hitters have been hitting for 4 months. Right. Okay. Good point. So again, it's a difficult judgment. It's just looking at the stats is
And it seems like you can make a more educated guess on what Garcia is going to do, but not McCullers, because McCullers, again, his rehab seems like it's going slowly. We're getting another one of those. Look, I hate it for him. I think that I think it kills him not to be out there, but it does seem like we're doing this again.
Yeah, well, and part of why we're doing it again is because Lance is both public and optimistic, and neither one of them, I'm not criticizing him for either one of those.
Yeah.
But, it does lead me to every time anyone says anything about Lance McCullers rehab to say, okay, I'm just going to add 2 weeks onto that because, well, again, I've seen that before. So, again, athletes are optimists because, I can do this. I can do this stuff is, part of how they're wired to think about, how they're wired to think about things, how they're essentially trained to think about things. So, again, Lance should be optimistic. I'm going to come out and I'm going to throw, I'm going to throw the last 4 innings of the ALCS again because we've seen him do that. He should think that way. I don't have to be in charge of Lance McCullers' psychology, so I can judge it in a different way than him. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think definitely pitching. I think if I were them, I would look to acquire 1, if not 2.
Yeah.
Because I do think if you acquire some pitching, obviously you move, like you were saying earlier, you move Arrighetti to the bullpen. The bullpen does get stronger and deeper. I've been really impressed.
And you could really use a multi-inning guy in the bullpen.
Right, yes.
And we really saw that in how they managed the bullpen game, where I think they went with Dubit longer than they should have, in part because they're like, we just can't rely on a lot of people for multiple innings out of the bullpen. So I got to get enough innings out of this guy. So again, if it's Arrighetti, you've got more option. It makes Joe Espada's life easier in September. But again, you can't get there until you have multiple starting pitchers return from the IL or you acquire one. And that seems to me the bigger priority.
What do you think your overall strategy if you were the one in charge? I've seen people argue that a rental is better because you're giving up less at least player capital. You might be asked to take on more salary for a bit versus obviously the more control you acquire, the more you have to give up. So where do you sit on that argument?
I would lean towards a rental mostly because they don't have a lot of highly regarded prospects yet. Last year's draft seems to be promising, but that's still, people who are a year or 2 away and haven't sort of risen in sort of the rankings. And getting a multi-year guy will probably take a top 100 prospect, and they only have sort of one of those, and they had 2 of them last year. And they traded them both, so it's very much sort of all in. I'm not sure one of those people is out there. That's the other sort of thing is most of the names you're hearing, there aren't a lot of candidates for multi-year guys. There are a lot of candidates of rentals. Apparently all of the Rangers rentals are available. And, I would welcome all of them, any or all of them to Houston. And, because we take people in a crisis, unlike the people of Dallas.
Boom. Brian, that's the most petty you've ever been on this show.
So I knew you'd like that.
Yeah, I'm proud of rubbing off on you.
I knew you'd like that.
I'm going to take credit for that. Yeah, but I did see, obviously these prognosticators, they know about as much as you and I do. But I've seen that the Rangers could be offering up pretty much all of their starting rotation, Scherzer, Lorenzen, and others. Is there a guy out there, a name that you're like, yeah, this guy I think would fit right in?
I mean, anyone who's healthy and can take some innings, because I think the one name I've heard where I think it'd be really good is Jesus Luzardo of the Marlins, because he would be a multi-year person. I think he would be for sort of next year, but I don't know if they can match the prospect cost for them. He's also been injured this year, so that's not as ideal as some of the other people, but. It's mostly the names we've heard so far have mostly been rentals, but things may change. The other thing to think about, Fangraphs had a piece on this today, is you may see more sort of depth trades. So one thing the Astros may consider is trading one of their extra outfielders.
Okay, that's going to be my next question.
Yeah, for us, for either a starting pitcher or a first baseman who could be sort of a better defender than Singleton, and that might be a better sort of alignment of the Astros resources. Don't know who that is or sort of person out there, but again, and the starting pitching, the Astros are not unique in saying like, oh my God, all our starting pitchers are injured. We have to put them all in bubble wrap and never let one of them ever leave.
One player that the Astros have been linked to, though, is Christian Walker from the Diamondbacks. Of course, who's doing the linking. I think Heyman had the story, although I guess Heyman actually does have pretty decent, or Nightingale has pretty decent sources. Can you see a move like that, though, where you basically upgrade the outfield and remove some of the question marks of who plays when?
Yeah, I mean, well, Walker is one of the best defensive first basemen in baseball, if not the best. So would certainly address the defensive concerns I mentioned. At first base, it kind of depends. I mean, so some of that depends on the Diamondbacks and whether they want to sell or not. He would be a free agent after this season. He'd be a rental, but the Diamondbacks are not out of the race. I think they're relatively close in the National League wild card. And if any team is going to believe, if we just get in,
it's them. Yeah.
Lightning will strike. Our mediocre bullpen will all of a sudden be lights out. Diamondbacks only have to look back to, last season.
Yeah.
To, are the Dodgers really that tough? The Diamondbacks don't think so.
I think they actually just give us Christian Walker because we already gave him Brent Strong, and we never really got anything for that. So, but one of the names I've seen as possible trade bait is Jake Myers, and I would hate to see that happen because I think you are, you've been a believer in Jake Myers since the beginning. Obviously, it's fun to see the guy healthy and playing well on both sides of the ball. It does disappoint me how much my wife is into him, but that's really a me and her problem, not necessarily a you, me, and her problem.
Well, first of all, it shows you that the Astros should not acquire any. Us married men don't want the Astros to acquire any more players named Jake.
That's right. No more Jakes, yeah.
So that seems to be the problem right there.
Yeah, totally.
No Jake Marisnik, no Jake Myers, no Jake from State Farm. None of those.
We're good.
Jake Gyllenhaal, none of those people. Probably not Maggie Gyllenhaal either, because I don't think she can, has the defensive shot.
She's got a really good bat, but yeah, she doesn't really play very good defense.
Yeah. Jake Myers is a pretty high-quality major league starting player. And so you'd have to replace him with someone like that. And then Jake Myers has a couple more years before free agency, a couple more years of team control. So you'd also not want a rental for Jake Myers. So I think they could consider that in the sense that there are very few players they shouldn't consider trading. But I think the ability to match the value of Jake Myers, particularly for a starting pitcher, is high and would be difficult to find it. Could they find it? Maybe, but there's nothing wrong with them sort of exploring those deals because they should explore as much as possible, particularly with trading an outfielder. This may be why they don't send Chaz down, is they're hoping that he gets, he can have more value and he may be someone they'd consider in such a deal. But they need to explore lots of avenues. I guess the sort of other thing to sort of know in the big picture part of it is there's only a handful of teams who are clearly out of the playoff race. And so the number of teams that sell right now seems to be relatively low.
And that is what we've been talking about this since the beginning. When the minute you increase the playoff pool, you decrease the trade deadline's urgency.
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't quite seen it as much the first 2 years of the sixth wild card, but it seems to be a bigger issue here this season because, again, in discussion of the Diamondbacks, they're not far out. I don't think anyone thinks the Cardinals are a good team. I believe the Cardinals are in the playoffs right now.
Yeah.
Tell you about more disappointments with the Cardinals this year. Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado seem to be old and, seem to be old and fading. And Jordan Walker, their big prospect, has not hit at AAA. But they're in the they've got enough good players that they're in the wild card race. So again, but I'm also, if I'm looking at them in the Diamondbacks, like I can catch those guys. I want to trade Christian Walker and a shot at this for those guys. So again, it's there may not be a lot of trade partners out there for a prospect deal. And
but
again,
a salary
trading one of the outfielders. Yeah. Well, yeah. A salary dump is, again, one of the ways that you might get, 18 that I just don't want to pay this guy for the rest of the year. Would you take him on? You get what's the tolerance of Jim Crane for adding more to his luxury tax bill? Is it, we don't have a lot of precedent for that. We don't know. He's been pretty aggressive. He's been willing to spend it this year. We'll see where that goes.
I wonder too in the front office if Brown realizes that, you built the team one way, but to keep it going consistently, you have to do it differently, which is, I think particularly when Dana Brown's shown that he's already had one good draft, so you don't want to, even though those guys are really climbing up through the lower minors, you don't necessarily want to part ways with them at this point.
Yeah, but he may want to part ways with the people James Click drafted because they're not his guys. So maybe more willing to trade a guy from a previous draft. We shall see. Of course, there are less good players from those drafts because, again, those are the ones the Astros didn't have their first or second round pick.
They didn't? I didn't know that.
It's weird. It's not covered much.
They didn't talk about it at all.
Yeah.
Certainly not even on NFL Today, which for some reason was weird. But, well, Brian, again, we have 6 games left until the All-Star break. 6 very winnable games for the Astros. The Rangers team that they've already pretty much beaten up on a little bit this season, and a Marlins team that is reeling. I really think the Astros need to have a 4-2 homestand to finish this thing out. What about you?
Yeah, and you would again, they're better than these two teams, both in their record this year and sort of the quality of talent that they have. And of course, this is an exciting opportunity for the Astros to scout in person several potential trade candidates from both of these teams.
Maybe we can do the old quick commute trade like a couple of years ago.
Hey, Christian Vasquez can, walk over, that Christian Vasquez just walk over to the other clubhouse trade in front of a bunch of befuddled media members and create a, extra story out of it. Always delightful.
Always delightful. Okay, Brian, well, that's going to wrap us up for today. For Andy Tom Chesson, who is, like many Houstonians, dealing with it. Again, if there's anything we can do, please just message us on Twitter, even if it's just we have a pretty big platform on our other Twitter account. Brian, good luck this week. We'll be back next Monday, and go Stros.
Go Stros.